Eastern Europe. Okay. All right. You guys do okay? Okay. All right. Very good. As I was saying, we're going to do the notes on this. When you guys come in on Monday, we'll actually do the CNN video in class on that because the green group will be watching that at home. They're going to get the notes on this tomorrow, and then they'll watch the video at home. And then on Wednesday, we'll do the CNN video on the 60s. I'm not going to give you notes on that so much because you've actually already got a lot of kind of the domestic front in the United States in the 1960s already with the civil rights movement. And we've been talking about various different things that have been taking place during the Kennedy administration, Johnson administration with the anti-war Vietnam War movement, and the Nixon administration. We'll talk about that and the anti-Vietnam War movement going on there. So here is, write this down, this is the video is called Red Spring, and it actually has a particular focus, and we'll turn our attention ultimately to Czechoslovakia, okay? Czechoslovakia. Today it is the Czech Republic, or Czechia, and then Slovakia. It was an Eastern European country. We've talked about that quite a bit. Are they happy to have the Soviets there and have the Red Army there? No, no. They're not real happy about that. They didn't have much choice. They had been taken over. Some of you guys, who took over Czechoslovakia, like at the beginning of World War II? You remember that, Tara? Who was the one that took over Czechoslovakia at the beginning of World War II? It was Germany, yeah. It was Hitler, yeah. And so, yeah, at the end of the war, the Soviets were the ones who liberated Czechoslovakia and all of Eastern Europe and was able to establish their military control there. That's a very important thing. Write that down. The Red Army is in all Eastern European countries, all communist Eastern European countries, except for which, Jack? Which country is communist in East Europe but does not have the Red Army there and is, in a sense, then neutral in the Cold War? We're going to turn a lot of attention to it next semester when we look at when it breaks apart. It doesn't exist today. And I want to say there's like 8 or 9 different countries. Yugoslavia, exactly. Joseph Tito had led the partisans in gaining control and kicking the Nazis out, and so the Soviets were never invited, and yada, yada, yada. Okay? So, what we're looking at is the Soviet Union, we're looking at Eastern Europe, and we're looking at a lot of sort of the domestic situation. Here's kind of the overview. You ready? We've got 2 different Soviet leaders we'll be looking at. We start off with Nikita Khrushchev, right here, in our little doll. Oh, look, and there's Stalin. That reminds us that Stalin was the one who died in 1953, and Khrushchev came into power as the lead Soviet political leader. Although, make sure you write this down if you haven't written it before. Khrushchev doesn't have the same kind of control over the Soviet Union that Stalin did. Stalin was like unchallenged ultimately in the Soviet Union. Khrushchev will be challenged, and you can put this down in your notes already. He is going to be deposed in October of 1964. In October of 1964, Khrushchev will be kicked out of power. Not killed, but retired by the other top party leaders in the Soviet Union's Politburo. That's the top committee of communist leaders there. So that gives you a sense that Khrushchev never had like a complete, absolute firm control on that #1 position. That's kind of how it's going to be from here on out. You never really see, I mean, you'll have different leaders. We'll move on next to Brezhnev, okay, and he's going to be the top position. Raise your hand if you can tell me, what is the title of the top position in the Soviet Union, at least in the political party? And that actually is the most important one. General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party. Okay, General Secretary. So we got General Secretary Khrushchev, and then we get General Secretary Brezhnev. And Brezhnev's going to be there. We'll see him throughout the remainder of this unit and then early into our next unit. He dies an old man in the early 1980s, okay, and he'll be replaced by 2 other men, and ultimately the guy right over here to my right, the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. Okay, so there's Brezhnev. There is another one that shows up in your notes, Alexei Kosygin. You can write his name down. It's in the handout. He's the premier from 1964 to 1980. The premier, that's a political position. His real power is that he's a member of the Politburo, a member of the top communist in the Soviet Union. Okay? So, there you go. Those are the ones who were there. They've got the responsibility. They, along with the other top members of the Politburo, are going to be in charge of the Soviet Union, and make sure you have this down, they're also in charge of making sure that East Europe stays under their control. There's always this concern that Eastern European countries are going to try and like flake out, actually do what they really want to do, which is be independent. What happened to Hungary in 1956 when the Hungarian political leadership said, hey, can we just like take a break and not be involved in the Cold War and be neutral just like our neighbor Austria? Do you remember, Jacob, what happened in 1956? Did the Hungarians get their independence? No, they didn't get their independence. There were Soviet troops. Yeah, Hungary is going to be a Soviet-dominated Eastern European country that in 1956 there was a rebellion. Remember how that rebellion turned out? Very badly for the Hungarian leadership. And the top communist, Imre Nagy, he ended up dead. He was fighting off the Soviet authorities. He had his folks fighting against the Soviet military. And who won? Boom, the Soviet military. That's a key message. If you try and go too far afield in East Europe, watch out, because the Soviets are keeping a close eye on things, and they may come in. And the last card that they always have is their military. And are they willing to use the military? Was Khrushchev willing to use the military in Hungary in 1956? Heck yeah. Write this down. Will Brezhnev be willing to use the military in Czechoslovakia in 1968? Because that's going to be the culminating episode in this particular look that we're having here. Will Mr. Brezhnev, will he use Soviet troops if he doesn't like what's going on in an Eastern European country, in this case, Czechoslovakia? Okay? That's going to be the deal. What's that? Does he? What do you think? Yeah, he does. Yeah, we've got a slide for that, and you'll see that quite clearly. You'll have Soviet troops ultimately coming into capital Czechoslovakia. It's called Prague. Okay, it's called Prague. And the Soviet troops are going to come in, and they're going to crush it. Okay, so that's going to be part of the story here. It's another sad story. But let's look at some of the other aspects that are going on there. Okay, Khrushchev, he's a very impulsive guy. Okay, so he's in charge. He's the top leader. Very impulsive. He almost blew it. Write this down. Other Soviet leaders were not real happy with how everything ultimately went down in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because remember we talked about that before? Khrushchev looked at Kennedy and said, oh, this guy's just a party boy. He's a lightweight. I can have my way with him. But ultimately, did Khrushchev get completely his way with Kennedy? Was Kennedy just an easy pushover, or did Kennedy resist when the Soviets put missiles in Cuba? Yeah, there was a conflict. I mean, it almost came to World War III. Excuse me. Yeah, World War III. Got to get the order right. Yeah, we've done 1, we've done 2. Let's not do 3. Okay? Hashtag. Let's leave it at 2. All right? So, I mean, Khrushchev, he's ultimately, that's one of the reasons why he's deposed. Although that was 1962. He's going to get deposed in 1964. What else was going on in the Soviet Union? That's what we're going to look at. What else was going on in the Soviet Union that is going to lead Soviet leaders to say, yeah, we don't have that confidence in you. We're going to give you your walking papers. Well, it's not the space program. In the early 60s, you can write this down, the space program is still having success, right? Because the Soviets have made it a top priority. They made rocket science a top priority. That's why they're the first ones to get satellites up into space, the first ones to get rockets up into space, the first one to get a man up in space. And write this down. Valentina Tereshkova, 1963, the first woman in space. So let's see, the Soviets, first dog, first man, first woman. I just did. And actually, it's interesting because is it that much more of an accomplishment to send a woman in space as opposed to a man? No. I mean, to send a human in space is the real big important thing. And I think that it's interesting because I think the Soviets, in sending a woman to space, was that just sort of like a token woman, or were women an integral part of their space program? And it is a very good question. And I'm wondering if there's a little bit of tokenism and so forth there. Who was the first woman to go up into space for the United States? Was she among the very first astronauts? No. No. I want to say the first woman to go up in space for the United States, I want to say in the 1980s. Okay, maybe in the late 70s. But we were sending astronauts up there in the 1960s. And we never sent a woman to the moon. Can women handle that kind of responsibility? What do you think, Ellie? Of course, yes, exactly. Some of those opportunities aren't there. So anyway, Valentina Tereshkova, first woman in space, 1963. Here's the deal, though. They got that done because they prioritized their command economy to say military and space. And of course, there is an overlap, because if you can send rockets up into space with people on them, these are the same kind of rockets that ultimately will deliver intercontinental ballistic missiles and things like that we talked about last time. Okay? But here's the problem with the command economy. We talked about this before. Do you get as much production when the government controls all facets of the economy? Do you get individuals working that extra bit harder and innovating and so forth in order to get profit for themselves because they don't own the companies? So here is a big downside. We've seen this before. Write this down. Consumer goods are lacking in the Soviet Union and in Eastern European countries with those Soviet communist command economies. Consumer goods are lacking. I mean, we see this in the German areas. If you were in East Berlin and you want a better life, what do? You walk over to West Berlin, because then you can own your own home, set up your own business, earn various different pieces of money. I mean, if you do something great in the Soviet economy, you get a badge. You know, you get a badge and a hurrah, hurrah, you were so good. You helped the country meet the 5-year plan, the quota, the goals. But this is a problem, okay, because there's so much focus on defense and heavy industry, less on consumer goods. And so it's hard. So here's what Khrushchev tries to do. You ready? Khrushchev makes a decision to put more effort into light industry and consumer goods. Write that down. Because he's getting some, pushback. I mean, it's not like, oh, you're going to lose the next election. No, they're not going to lose the next election. But as a country, you hear about that, and you're like, so what can we do? Okay? I mean, I'll give you an example. During Khrushchev's time, 1959, there was an exhibition. Khrushchev invited the United States to set up an exhibition in Moscow, okay, of consumer kinds of things. And so literally, you have sort of like stuff that you could see in America if you were living there. I mean, like things that if you walked into somebody's house, you're like, yeah, that's what it looks like. But for Soviet people in Moscow who went to the American exhibit, they're like, oh my gosh, they've got a television, they've got a refrigerator, they've got a stove, they've got all these different things. No, it didn't have that. Not to the degree that the American economy had it. The American consumers could have that. America was far ahead of it. It was very interesting because as part of that exhibition, President Eisenhower sent over his vice president, Richard Nixon, to Moscow for the opening of the American exhibition. Khrushchev was there. Nixon and Khrushchev got into a debate, an informal debate right there. Nixon was saying, hey, under our system, look what you get. You get all these great consumer items and so forth. And Khrushchev is still trying to have his way, saying, we're better than you and everything. Well, I mean, the facts were right there. They literally call it the kitchen debate. In history, they call it the kitchen debate. I mean, who do you think won the kitchen debate, really? Nixon or Khrushchev? The person with the kitchen, yeah. I mean, it's like the person with the stuff. And so Khrushchev knows that. He's like, what can I do to do this? But here's the downside. If the Soviet leader puts more effort to make consumer goods available to people, what does that mean? Here's the old thing in economics. If the pie is only so big, you can only cut it so many ways, the pie never gets bigger, right? If I get a bigger piece, you get Less. So how does capitalism like handle that challenge of dividing up the pie? Make a bigger pie. Do we have a bigger pie? Actually, I read something today. It said that Idaho, of all the 50 states, has the fastest growing economy of all the 50 states, percentage-wise. And you notice that if you drive around, you're like, oh my gosh, they're building everywhere. People are coming in and so forth. Well, yeah, it's like, you know, those of you guys who like the good old-fashioned, you know, little Idaho and so forth, you know, I think it said something like the Idaho economy is growing at like, you know, I want to say it was like an 8% rate, which is a really big. The pie is getting bigger in Idaho. But of course, more people are coming in to eat the pie, and housing costs are going up. But anyway, whatever. I'm sure it'll all work out everything for everybody. Yeah, you sell your house, and then you live in a box. Okay. Right, you mean that the difficult thing about selling a house is you still have to buy another house, but yada, yada, yada. So here's the deal. Who would not be happy? I'm not going to ask Daniel because he's got a mouthful. Okay? Tara, who would not be happy if Khrushchev says we're going to put more focus and effort into light industry and like kitchen stuff and consumers. Oh, and guitar strings. Remember that from 10th grade? Hello? Yeah, exactly. Who would not be happy about that? Who's getting less of the pie if Khrushchev says we're going to put more attention on light industry and so forth? The Americans are not part of the Soviet economy. Yeah, the Soviet economy. Who's been getting top priority as far as spending in the Soviet economy? No. The military. The military has been the top priority. Military science, yeah, and the cosmonauts and so forth. But the cosmonauts get the money because there's military implications to all of that. Okay? So write that down. The military is not happy with them. And that actually is going to play a critical role in Khrushchev getting ousted ultimately. Okay? Because the military is like, hey, come on, this is our money, we need it for our purposes and so forth. You know, and here's another thing, and this is where he actually kind of screws up a bit, all right? Because, I love this. The Matryoshka doll here has got Khrushchev, and it's got corn. And I'm like, that's weird, why would they put corn there? And I'm like, you know what? It makes perfect sense to me. Whoever did that was being critical of Khrushchev. Write it down. Khrushchev instituted in the early 1960s a new agricultural policy called virgin lands. Okay? Who's in charge of agriculture? The government is. The Communist Party is. What decisions did they make? We need more grain. Well, what kind of grain? How about let's try corn? Two parts of this policy. One, they take what are called virgin lands, grasslands, lots of them in like Central Asia and so forth, and they plow them under, and then they grow wheat on them, in part. Doesn't yield near as much. There's a reason why those lands hadn't been used for the production of wheat previously. They're not that good for it. Sorry. And then he also introduced a lot of growing of corn. Do we grow a lot of corn in this country? Are you kidding me? We grow tons of corn, okay? And corn is a good thing to grow. And farmers, if they're trying to decide to grow corn or barley or rye or wheat, I mean, do we trust American farmers to make those decisions? Because if they make smart decisions, what do they get? Money. If they make stupid decisions, what do they get? Not so much money. Yeah, they might fold. Khrushchev grows lots and lots of corn. But corn is not so well suited for the climate of the areas that he decides to grow it in. And so it actually leads to shortages of grain, of, you know, the kind of things that you need to feed people. Oops. I mean, they're literally, let me see, 1963, they had a crop failure of corn. It's just too cold. And so they had to, I mean, this is embarrassing. If you're the Soviet Union, you don't grow enough food to feed yourself, where are you going to get the food? Where are you going to buy the grain? You buy it from the West, yeah. Will we sell it to them? Will other countries sell it to them? Mm-hmm. For money. It is embarrassing, yeah. So that was one of the things. That was kind of the last straw, or cornstalk, if you were, that led to Khrushchev being moved aside and then Brezhnev coming in as the new Soviet leader. Okay? A couple of other things to focus in on, and they're going to talk about as well in this video. Okay? One of them is consumer goods. I mean, Gorbachev, excuse me, Khrushchev, and then, of course, later Brezhnev, are going to try and show off that, hey, we got great consumer goods. I mean, that's the party line. We got great stuff. Of course, if you find out what the West has, then you're like, it's not so great. See if you can figure this out. Sage, in what city in the Soviet Union would you find the best availability of consumer goods, clothes, and other kinds of things? Correct. Write that down. In Moscow. I can tell you exactly the store. I've been there. It's called GUM. G-U-M. It's a very big department store, and it's right off of Red Square, which is in the main area of the city of Moscow. And they have the best stuff. So they will highlight the best stuff. And of course, it's available to, I mean, who can go into Moscow to go shopping? Party leaders and so forth are there. Occasionally you will have, and this, sometimes people in Idaho can appreciate this. If you live out, I don't know, like in Horseshoe Bend, where do you shop for stuff in Horseshoe Bend? If you want to do a big grocery shop, where do you go? You go to Boise, right? I mean, you load up the car, you go to Boise, you go to one of the big, places to get, and then you do your big shop, and then you go back over the hill, over the mountain. That's what people do in the Soviet Union as well. You write that down. If you're close enough to Moscow and you can go in for a big shop, you go into GUM. Not everyone's going to have that opportunity. In some of the other areas of the country, it's going to be much more difficult. And you can write this down. Not everyone can easily just go into Moscow. It's not like in this country, can you travel pretty much wherever you want? Yeah. What about in the Soviet Union? Not so necessarily, okay? And it is kind of a hassle because it's like, I remember going to GUM, you stood in line for one thing, got a piece of paper that said that you would pay for the thing that you wanted, and then you got into another line to hand your piece of paper in to actually retrieve the thing that you had purchased. And that was the best store. So, they still didn't quite have it. They started adapting Western fashions. Write this down. Khrushchev eases up a little bit in allowing for some of the new Western fashions coming in. And I tell you, like hairstyles, oh my gosh, guess what the hairstyle that was in the early 60s? The mullet? No, not the mullet. The Beatles hair, like the Fab Four. Everyone started having, and the tight jeans, they started wearing those things. Young people, write this down. Young people were starting to dress more like folks from the West. They were listening to their music as much as they possibly could. What can Khrushchev do to that? Well, I tell you what, some of the Communist Party leaders were not happy about that. Because they're like, from the West comes decadence. It comes an erosion of your Soviet communist fundamental values. And so, and here, portable radios, are those going to be easily available for Soviet citizens? No. What's the danger of a portable radio, Jacob? Yeah, especially if you live near a border area where you could listen to Finnish radio or listen to some of the other, and the United States, of course, is broadcasting in. I mean, it gets jammed, so it's not going to go too far in, but if you got a portable radio, yeah, you can pick up some of that stuff. So those, if you had a portable radio, you kept it pretty well hidden. I remember going to visit some friends in the Soviet Union, and they showed me the portable radio that they had that they would take out in order to pick up broadcasts from Finland and so forth. Because they just wanted to know what was going on. What is the agency within the Soviet Union that's in charge of sort of monitoring what people are doing? KGB. Yeah, KGB. Yeah, they're in charge of international stuff as well as domestic stuff. And they keep a very close eye on these things, including private relations. Oh my gosh, could you imagine? I mean, you're like, my dad doesn't like who I'm dating, but seriously, I got called in by the KGB, the political party is talking to me about who I'm dating, what I'm doing in my dating life and so forth. That is happening there, because they're like, oh my gosh. So you're like, I don't know what to say to my son. Don't worry, we'll take care of it, right? We will have conversation with him, yes. And of course, art. They hated, Khrushchev especially hated bourgeois art. Modern art. They hate that stuff. It's kind of like Hitler. Remember talking about Hitler didn't like the modern art? Khrushchev doesn't like the modern art either. Whether it's visual or dance or music, they don't like it. Okay, so they're very, very critical of it. Okay, they hate it. And yet, this is where we're transitioning. Okay, there's Leonid Brezhnev. He comes in. And yet, in Czechoslovakia, oh my gosh, which has a rich cultural history, and they were free and independent before the Nazis took over and then the Soviets took over and so forth. They still love a lot of their independence and cultural sorts of things. Václav Havel, you'll see him in the video. Václav Havel, who ultimately is going to lead the Czech resistance at the end of the Cold War. He's a playwright. He wants to write plays that are creative and interesting, and they don't necessarily follow the typical communist Soviet theme. Václav Havel, you see his name in your notes? Okay? He's going to have a hard time being able to write the kinds of plays that he wants to. Keep an eye on him, because he's going to play a key role in the ultimate dissolution of Soviet authority in Czechoslovakia. Important event. When Brezhnev comes into power, the Czech political leadership, by 1968 is going to be the critical year, and you're going to see this in the film that we go through starting on Monday. They're going to remove from power Antonín Novotný. He's the more hardline leader of the Czech Communist Party. And they're going to bring in Alexander Dubček. He is going to be much more moderate, much more open. He's going to try and bring in changes, beginning in the early part of 1968. They call it the Prague Spring. And the idea is we're going to introduce a little bit of, try this, market economy. Do we call it capitalism? No. They call it socialism with a human face. But it is a little bit of capitalism. They're going to start ending censorship bit by bit. That's a critical component. Ending censorship. So the Czech communist leaders under Dubček are going to start easing things up quite a bit in Czechoslovakia. Can they do that without bringing down the hammer from the Soviet Union? No. By the summertime, the Soviets are organizing troop exercises from Warsaw Pact troops and so forth, basically saying, here's a warning. You need to have more censorship. You need to stop acting like you're not part of the Warsaw Pact. Otherwise, we're going to send in the troops. And what did they do? Boom. They sent in the troops. This would have been August 21st, 1968. The Soviet Union sends in their paratroopers. They seize the airport. They know how to do this now. They put a lot of pressure. They send in the tanks. Dubček gets on the radio and basically says to the Czech people who are initially resisting, stop resisting. It's not going to work. The Prague Spring, that opportunity for openness and lack of censorship and so forth, is snuffed out. Brezhnev says, I will do just what Khrushchev has done. I'm not going to allow for more openness in a communist-dominated Warsaw Pact country. Okay? You'll see it all play out in the video, and that's what we're going to be doing here next time. We're done with the notes. This is good. Wipe down your desks. Head to the bathroom early if you need to, and have an awesome one.